Hey programmers, what is going on? I'm the Savage Coder and welcome to episode 31. In this episode, we are going to jump back into mostly the API code, make a couple of tiny little fixes that exist in our MVC code. We're going to leave React for another episode. And I recently had an excuse to need to put some logging into things, and I thought I would share with you one of the ways that you can hook up logging in your own code. We can either log to a file, we can log to a service where we can query our logs. When do we use logs? What are logging levels? So if this is at all interesting to you, then this is the episode for you. This will kind of be a little standalone episode. I'm going to have to comment the code out at the end, but I will leave it in the Git repo, so you'll have to uncomment if you want to use this code. The reason for that is one of the services we're going to use has a unique key. I'll leave it in there for you to use. I'm not going to really need logging in this sample app that we're doing for this course. But at least you'll have it if you want to do any kind of logging in any of your applications, or if you're building something similar, then you can go ahead and leave it in your code. You'll just have to remove that secret out, and I'll show you where you can do that. All right, so with that, let's get to it. But first, okay, so first thing I want to do here is I would like to fix a couple of small details that are causing bugs in the MVC UI. And to show you what this is, let's go ahead and run our API. And while that's spinning up, I will run the UI project. This again is just running the MVC project that you can pull from Git the way it sits today at episode 31. Okay, so here's the login screen we've seen. I'm going to click login, and it's going to go out to the API, and it's going to get us a list of products. It's a little slow just because it's still spinning up here, and I got a lot of recording things running. But so if we click on MacBook Pro, you're going to see the issue here. We're failing here with a 401 unauthorized. The reason we're getting that is because in a previous episode where we hooked up our token, we made a base class that sticks the token into the header for us so that when we call the API from our MVC project, it sends our authentication along automatically. Well, we never updated the product details page for that route, so that when we go to an individual item, we're actually calling like API products 3, and we never converted that over. It's still using the old code, which is requesting the API with no token and no anything. So first thing we're going to do is we are going to fix that issue, and it's very simple. We're going to go into the repository for our products repository. And just as a quick refresher, in case you don't remember or didn't watch this previous episode, I have this repository base class that dependency injects our Floral client. It sets up the base URL. And then it says before any call, go ahead and see if we have a token in our cookie. And if we find a token in the cookies collection in the request, then go ahead and set the bearer token from that cookie value. If we don't find a token, then we replace the bearer token with just string.empty. So before each call, this gets called, it sets the header for authorization, and away it goes. And then, to use it, we then just our repository just inherits from repository base, which gives it access to all that functionality. I can just use the Floral client request, and all the token stuff is taken care of. So if you notice here, I'm not doing that at all. I'm not using that Floral client. So we're almost going to copy this code right here, but we're going to have to use this URL. And our return type is not a list of products. Here we're getting one product by a specific ID, so we're just returning a product, not a list of product. So I'm just gonna I'm just going to type it out myself, return, await, grab that Floral client from the base class, call request on it. Now in here, I can just grab this URL the way it sits because that's already correct. Underneath, I can do a get JSON async, and we're going to return a product, not a product list, and that's it. So I can get rid of this old call now, and before the request call, it's going to intercept that and stick the token in. So just by doing that, we should be able to get to our page. There is one other small issue that we have to fix because we moved where our images were so that we could share them with React. So if I log in now and I click MacBook Pro, notice I get the page. It's just that the image is broken. And if we inspect that and see, why is that not working, you can see that it's looking in images. And it's looking, if you look at what pops up there, it's actually looking at images after product detail images in this little hover here. So that URL, let me copy the link address. Maybe I can blow that up in Notepad so you can see that. Control plus. So you see where it's going for this image that's not working is it's taking this image's laptop and it's sticking it onto the end of where product details is. Well, that's not where our images are. If we look in our project, you'll see that the images are under assets, images, and then the name of the image. So we want it to start from the top there, from the root to assets, images. In other words, we don't want products and product details there. We really want something like that, right? Because that's the URL for our images. As a matter of fact, if I copy that and just put it into our browser on a new tab, we probably can see that image. So we've got to rebuild that. And so we're going to go into the API. We're going to go into the UI and let's go to the view. And under products, we're going to go to the product details view. And here's that image right here. And so all I want to do is I want to go to the beginning of this. And I just want to say start at the top at root. And then assets. And then whatever you have stored that's coming back as image, which is already images laptop PNG. That's what's in this image property of selected product. So now with this leading slash, it'll get rid of the product and product details like we want. So if I save this, then we should be in business. And we can get on to our logging adventure. So now I go to MacBook Pro, I see the MacBook Pro. If I go to ESP guitar, I get a guitar, etc. Okay, so let's start talking a little bit about logging. So logging is something you're going to need to investigate problems. It helps you debug things in production. If you have an exception that's thrown or an error that's thrown, you can look at your logs and see what went wrong, get a little bit better of at least an idea of what area of code, if not the exact line, that it blew up on. And sometimes it's harder and sometimes it's easy. Depends on what the problem is. The other thing you can do with logging is you can put in different logging levels. So you can say, hey, if I put my logging level at debug, I can write debug and informational messages to my log and also error messages to my log, right? And I can then search for details on things like, hey, what's the most popular product or what things are people clicking on the most. Logging's not always the best tool for that. Sometimes things like Google Analytics are even better at doing that. But even Google Analytics is essentially logging. So same concept. So what I want to do is I want to set up some logging in .NET. I'm going to use a product called Serilog. I happen to like that better than some of the other options. There's others out there like Log4Net you can check out. I think Serilog's a little better maintained. I like the list of syncs that it has. I think it's more extensive, and I like the way it sets up. Now, with one caveat, we're gonna first log to a file, and then we're gonna log to this service where we can query the logs. And this service that I normally use is called Splunk. Splunk's a great tool, but it's expensive, and they don't have a free tier, so I can't really show you how that sets up. What I can do is there's a competitor to Splunk called Loggly. It's good. It is part of a really nice suite. They do have a free tier. Unfortunately, setting up logging with Serilog at least is a little bit more complicated. So I'll show you how to do that. And it's not hard. It's just more steps. So I'll explain it best I can. And let's take a look at what we're going to log and then decide where we want to log it. So when I click on MacBook or when I click on ESP Guitar, I think I want to know what was clicked on. And then if I do click on it and there's an error building this page, if there's some kind of an exception, I want to log that too. And normally we set our logging levels in production, at least, to only log errors. So if we click on things like MacBook Pro and its log level is debug or information, if our log level on the logger is set to only log errors or, more severe things, then we won't even see those. So it's a way we can, by configuration, filter out what we don't want. Let's go ahead and go into our API, because all this is going to happen in our API project. And we're just going to play around with the repository. So I'm going to open up my products repository. Let's close everything but this. And then let's also open up our startup. And so the first thing I want to do is I want to install Serilog. So I'm going to right-click Dependencies and go to Manage NuGet Packages. All right, then we want to click the Browse tab here, and I want to search for Serilog. Serilog is going to give me a list of all the different pieces of Serilog. So the first one we need is the base Serilog package, which brings in the ability to integrate with .NET. There's another package we can use which allows us to hook into the ASP.NET Core, and that's this Serilog.ASP.NET Core. So just so everybody can see it, I'll type it out. There we go. Serilog.ASP.NET Core kind of takes the underpinnings that are already there for ASP.NET and allows Serilog to just hook into what's there. So that's going to save us some work putting that in. And I'll go ahead and accept. And the next thing that we want to put in is where we want to log to. So taking a look at the Serilog site, if we do a search in Google, or you just go to serilog.net and you scroll down, you can see all of these provided syncs. And so this is where we can log to, and this list is enormous. This is one of the reasons I love Serilog. Pretty much anything you can think of is in this list. So each of these has their own NuGet package, and you can just click on NuGet. If I wanted to log to an Amazon S3, I could just look for Serilog syncs Amazon S3 in NuGet. So the first thing that I think we'll do is let's just log to our debug window. And if you look in here, there is a debug, Serilog syncs debug. So I'm gonna go get that one. So Serilog syncs debug, and we'll install that one. So let's just stop there for now. There's a couple things we need to do to set up Serilog. So the first one is I'm going to set it up here in startup.cs in the root of the project. And above the add controllers, I'm going to set up the logger. So this is a static log instance. So I'm going to do log.logger. And if we look in our help here, you see that we can bring in using Serilog. So I'm going to do that. And that just brought in Serilog up here. And then we're going to set this equal to a new logger configuration. So I'm going to skip some lines here, and the last thing I want to do after new logger configuration is I'm going to do a create logger. And that is going to create a new logger configuration object. And then everything that we put in here is going to be the configuration that we want. Or we could put code in here that says, I'm going to put all my configuration in my app settings JSON and read that in and use that instead. Because of the complexity of Serilog, I'm going to show you both ways. And everything that I'm about to type is not magic. If we go back to our Serilog help into serilog.net and go to configuration basics. So here's the line that I just created, right? And so all the things that I'm about to do are on this page. You can read all about it, but I'm just going to kind of give you the quick once over. So the first thing I'm going to do is I'm going to do logger configuration, and it's got a Fluent API, so I can just keep tacking these onto each other. So after logger configuration, I can do dot minimum level dot debug, right? And then after that, dot create logger. So what this says is I want to log only things at the level of debug and higher. So when I write a line of code later that says, you know, log error, error is greater than debug, so it will log. If you go back to the Serilog page, and you look at levels, here's the order of the levels right here. So right now I'm choosing debug. So if I do a log verbose, we won't see that in our debug window because it's lower than debug. If I wanted to see verbose, then I would just set this to minimum level dot verbose. Okay. The next one that I'm going to do is going to filter out some of the default Microsoft stuff. So I'm going to do override, and normally I do Microsoft in here, right? But I'm going to actually create a constant because I don't like magic strings if I can help it. So I'm going to right click my project, and in my add menu, I know you can't see it on your screen. I'm on my new monitor. So right now, till I move things to another room, I'm just choosing add class. So out of the pop-up menu there. So we'll add a class, and I'm just going to call this class constants. And in my constants class, I just want a constant called Microsoft. So public const string Microsoft equals Microsoft. And that way I can just use this guy instead of having quote Microsoft quote inside here. I can just do constants dot. And then after Microsoft, then I have to put the log event level, which it's already giving me here. And I can put whatever I want here for the level of Microsoft events. I'm just going to put only show me like warnings and errors from Microsoft. I pretty much just want to mainly log my code. All right, so the other thing that I want to do is I want to enrich from log context. And what this does is it will look at the context object of the logger we're going to use, which is going to be dependency injected and come from the .NET subsystem. And so it can grab things like thread IDs and information that might help you diagnose. And it's just going to add it to the information that is actually logged. So it's not required, but this will give you a little more information. And you can read more about enrich. There's all different ways you can enrich what you log by default, especially with the different syncs and stuff like that. And lastly, the last thing I want to do here is tell it where to write its log to. So I'm just going to tell it write to, and then we're going to use debug, because that's the sync that we brought in. And so that's all we need to do to configure our logger. The one other thing that we need inside program CS, if we go down to the bottom of our create host builder here, I just have to put use Serilog. And I will bring in the using for Serilog. And that should be enough for what we need. So now, how do we actually log something? Well, let's go into our products repository, and I'm going to create a logger here. So I'm going to do private read-only ilogger, ilogger, and we'll just call it _logger. Now, ilogger is not even part of Serilog. ilogger is part of the Microsoft extensions.logging. So because we have all of our NuGet packages that integrate Serilog with the actual logging, I can just use the built-in logger from Microsoft as far as the interfaces, and Serilog will pick that up and do the logging for me. So the other thing I need to do in my constructor here is I need to set up the dependency injection, and I want it to send me an ilogger. Now, you can just do ilogger, logger, but if you want the logger to work and be able to know what class it's in, you take this class name and you give it the data type. And so you're telling it, hey, this logger is going to log information from this class. And then you just assign your logger to your logger. Right, so the injected logger is getting assigned. Okay, so I want to log the ID number and the actual product, but here we're getting all products, and then we are using a link query to say, go into this products list and get me one product, the first or default product, where the ID equals the number that was passed in. So rather than just return that so that I can log, I'm going to just call that product, right? Assign it to a variable instead of just returning, and then I can return product. What that allows me to do, it doesn't change the functionality of this function at all, but it now allows me to logger.log debug, and I can say product ID number is, and then we can do product dot, let's do title. So if I select the MacBook, it's going to come in here and send a 3, I think it was. So it'll grab the product for the MacBook, and then I can log, hey, the product 3 is MacBook Pro. And so this line will log asynchronously, and this line just keeps going and returns the product. So let's see if we see that in our debug window. So I'm going to just put a breakpoint on the log line, and now we can go back to our UI here, and I'm just going to click MacBook Pro because we didn't change anything on the front end here. All that logging stuff was done on the back end, and hopefully I didn't forget anything. So I click MacBook Pro. Let's expand our window here and make sure we are on our debug output. So I'm going to clear this. And once I step over this logger line, you can see it logged dbg, which is debug. That's the level of the log. And then product 3 is MacBook Pro. I don't know if you can see that, but it did log what we expected and the time that it logged. And of course we let it go. The UI doesn't look any different. If I go and I now log ESP guitar, Oh, there's a breakpoint. That's why. I hit it twice, so we might log twice. You can see product 2 is an ESP guitar. And it did do it twice. So everything is working properly, logging to our debug window. Well, that's good, but that's not something I can check later. So let's go ahead and log this to a file on the file system. So all I got to do is add a new sync. So we'll go to our NuGet package, and instead of syncs debug, I want the sync for file. And I'll install that. And if you want to know how to use it, we can go back to provided syncs, go to file, and here it says after your logger configuration, you do a .write to, give it a file name and a rolling interval. That sounds easy enough. So let's go back to our startup. And we can even leave the debug. It can write to more than one thing just fine. Write to file. So I'm just going to paste in what I had copied there. So it's going to be called log.txt, and it will roll that every day, meaning every day it'll make a new file so that the individual files don't get too big. So each day will have its own. So let's go ahead and run that. I didn't change anything else other than adding a new sync. Okay, and I'm going to click MacBook Pro. There's our logger. I'm going to let that go. And you can see it's still logging. Product 3 is a MacBook Pro. And if we look in our tree here, you can see this log file down here, log 2022. So log 2020-111, which is kind of weird because it's 2022. We'll have to look at what its naming convention. And so it says it's being used. So I'm going to go ahead and stop here. And let's take a look at it. So it wrote in the log that on 1/11/2022, product 3 is a MacBook Pro. And it'll just keep adding things to this log file until tomorrow at midnight. It'll start a new log file with a new name. And we could look up what the convention is here for log files, but it doesn't really matter. So let's keep going. So there's a service out there called Loggly. Let's take a look at Loggly. So Loggly is owned by SolarWinds, so you can come and you can click this start free trial button. I already have one. So go ahead and sign up for one of those free accounts if you want to follow along. Down the side here are a ton of things that you can set up and do, but we're interested in this middle icon, logs. So if you go into source setup, you can find pretty much support for any language. If you click on .NET, it'll show you how to set this up with Log4Net. If you want to use that, that's fine. Here's step-by-step instructions for that. We're going to do it with Serilog, though, which is a little more complicated. So first thing you want to do is go under this customer tokens, and there will be a secret token inside there. I'll let you see mine because I'm about to invalidate it right after I finish this video. So you can copy it, but it won't work. So if we set up our customer token, we can then go to our logs log explorer. And as long as we know that token, we can set up our project to log to Loggly here. And the nice thing about it is it's kind of like logging to a database, and whatever you want to search for up here, it'll show you all the matching logs. So very handy. So first thing we're going to do, of course, is add a sync for Loggly. So we're going to right click and we're going to look for Loggly. So there's the Serilog sync, so I'm going to click install. You would think if it was just like most of the other ones, we would have a write to, just like we did the file logger, and we would be on our way. But no. So everything that I'm about to show you is online in, if I can find my other browser here. If we look at our Serilog syncs Loggly in GitHub, which I got to from the syncs list right on the Serilog site, you can just go down to Loggly log. There it is. And so that brings you to the GitHub site. So it looks like you can just say, oh, write to Loggly and it'll just work. Yeah, that doesn't work. So don't even bother. I wish it worked, but it doesn't. It starts to tell you about some of the things you need to do here, where you got to add your customer token that I just showed you. But even this is kind of incomplete. So if you want to see how to do it, you have to go into this sample folder. And if you look under Program CS in their example, there's a lot of stuff in here that helps you set up the configuration for Loggly. You need a bunch of this. So I'm going to do it one way, and you can follow it this way as well, and then you've got your choice of how you want to do it. There's always more than one way, right? So let's first start out by going to our appsettings.json. And we have some stuff in here from another episode. We're going to leave that. I'm going to put a comma, and then we're going to add a Serilog section. And inside the Serilog section, now everything here that you put here, there is a configuration way, if you will, to put all of these minimum level debugs, overrides, enriches, all of that can go here in configuration. We just chose to do it another way. And then inside here, I'm going to put the stuff that is for Loggly. Okay, so all of our Loggly settings. So the first one we need is application name. And the application name, I'm going to just use, we'll call it Noble Cause Code. And then the next one is the account, which is also Noble Cause Code. And now this it'll have asked you for the account name. This is the same as the subdomain that they had you choose when you signed up for the free trial at Loggly. The next thing we need here is the endpoint port. Which is going to be 443. That still goes in quotes. And then is enabled. We can put true. And throw exceptions is true. Whoops. And then log transport will be HTTPS, and endpoint host name lowercase n will be logs-01.loggly.com. And lastly is that customer token. Since I'm sharing mine with you because it will not be good after this video, I'm going to go ahead and put my customer token that I got from Loggly. If you need this to know how to get here, just back the video up a little bit. I just showed you where to get that in the Loggly site. All right. So now we need to read all of these Serilog logly settings. And so to traverse this JSON, when we read it in startup, we do that by Serilog :logly. So if we wanted the database settings section, if we wanted to read all the settings below here, we would just say get the section database settings. If I said get section Serilog, it would grab any settings that I had here, right? And it would also grab all the logly settings. Well, I only want the logly settings, so I'm going to tell it get section Serilog :logly, and then it'll get all of these. And then what we'll do is we'll create a class with these same property names, and we'll have .NET read these configuration values and assign it to the class so that we have kind of a concrete class example of these property value pairs, right? We'll just create an object that'll be pre-populated. It'll just read this in and populate the object. All right, so first thing we want to do is we want to get our section. And so we've already kind of done that up here where we did our get section for the DB settings and for the crypto settings. So you can look back in a previous episode to see what that's doing really, but this line of code I can pretty much copy and paste here. And I don't want it to be DB settings. I want this to be logly settings. And so the settings that I want are Serilog :logly. And that's just these two right here, Serilog :logly. And that tells it to look at that node. Now, what I can do here at the end is I can do a bind on this. And anything that I put inside here, it will try and take all of the items that it gets from get section. It'll read all those logly values and try and bind it to an actual object. Well, I don't have a model to hold that yet. So let's go to models. I'm going to do add class. Again, that's off the screen, but it's just you should know how to add a class by now. And we're going to call this logly settings. Okay, I already have this typed out, so you don't have to sit here and watch. But basically, this is, we're not going to use username and password. I'm going to get rid of those. So this is the same thing that we just typed out in the settings. Application name, account, endpoint, port, is enabled, throws exception, right? All of these are just a concrete definition. And for log transport, there is a log transport type in logly, and the logly config is part of the sync, the logly sync. So now we can bind those values into these values. And so I just need an instance of that class. So I'm just going to say var logly settings is equal to a new logly settings object. And then I can just pass this empty object into the bind, and I don't even need to assign it to anything here, right? So that will create an empty that will create a new instance of logly settings, and it will grab all the name values from that section in configuration, and it'll populate all the properties of our logly settings. And you can use this technique for anything. If you ever want to read settings into a concrete object, this just will work all the time. And so the next thing we need to do is basically set up logly. So I'm going to make a method called setup logly, and I'm just going to pass in the logly settings that we just read in and set up. And I don't have this yet. So if I use the quick help, I can generate method. Oh, sorry. I'm going to undo that generate method because I misspelled this. And what it did was it just made this type object in this new method it made. So just to save me some typing, I'm going to Control Z. I'm going to use the correct name. And now when I do, come on. Now when I do generate method, it will have the right data type of the logly settings here. All right, so now I just need to set up logly with all those settings, and there's no trick to this. It's just config equals logly config dot instance, and this is just a static instance of the logly config from the sink. And so now we just gotta set everything, right? Like config dot customer token is equal to the logly settings dot customer token. So all the things that we read in here, we're just assigning to this config object one at a time. So config dot application name equals, and I'm just letting the AI assist here help me out so I don't have to type it all. Config dot transport equals new transport configuration, and we can set those objects of the transport configuration with the host name equal the logly. Oh, you're not going to help me now. The logly settings dot endpoint host name. We want the endpoint port. Now it's working. And then we can have the log transport equals log transport. So that sets up the transport. Then we have our throw exceptions is equal to whatever was in there. And then the only other thing we could do is we could define some tags. And so they'll be there. You just have to bring in the usings for these application name tags, which is just using logly. So it'll just add an application tag and a host tag name. That's something that logly itself supports and allows you to log with it. All right, so this will set up all of the logly stuff. And then finally, after all that, we can now do our write to dot logly. No comma. Okay. So hopefully that made sense. I hope I took it slow enough where you already understood the logger and what it's doing from the debug and the file. And then to get logly working, we're pretty much just reading the configuration out. And then we're copying those values from our config into an actual logly instance so that we set up the config. And that way we're assigning like our token and the endpoints and stuff so that it can send our logs to the logly service. So let's see if it works. Let's log the Doge. I like the little guy with the bow tie. I might still have a breakpoint. Oh, it blew up. Could not parse JSON file. All right, well, we have an error in our config somewhere. Let's see what I did wrong. I see what I did wrong. Ha! I closed my logly node. You see this dashed line going to my close. I did not close my Serilog, though. This is the close for the top one on line 1. So I am missing one of those guys. So let's try that again. All right, let's do the Doge. And we get a plural exception, unauthorized get. Why? Maybe our token went bad? Let's log in again. Restore that token. All right, that worked. So now we're going to log debug. So if I let that go, there's our Doge. If we look in our debug window, we can see product 9 is the Doge. We can probably look in our log file. Let's stop it and check that out. All right, it added our Doge line here with the current date. And let's go into logly and see if we can see it in our dashboard. Here's logly, so I'm going to search for quote dog. And I'm going to do today's date, and let's just tell it to search the last 10 minutes. And there it found it. Look, here it is right here. Product 9 is dog. I hope you can see that. Can I make that bigger? Yeah. So there you can see all the information. It tells you that it happened in get product, and the message is product 9 is a Doge. It is a level debug, which is because we did that log.debug. And then we can see it not as one big JSON blob. If we hit this little plus sign, it actually will break them out and show us things individually. And we can find that by searching. So very, very cool. Neat. Oop, wrong way. Neat stuff. So the only thing left that I want to show is that we can also trap exceptions. And so, oops, if we go to the products repository, and I'm going to go ahead and just make a try catch block. I'm going to catch the exception in a variable called EX. I'm going to take all of my code that I have here, including my logger, and I'm going to put everything in the try. So if anything fails here, anything blows up, it's going to catch that, and it's going to enter into the catch block here. Now what's it going to do after it goes in here? It's just going to rethrow the same exception. But before it throws it and blows up like it always would, I can add a logger.log error, right? Because this is a hard error. And I can put dude, and then after that I can put EX as my object so that I can examine the exception that happened. I can send the whole EX to my logger, and it will log everything that's in there as well. Now what I can't do here, what I cannot do, is I don't have access to these two variables anymore. So I wouldn't be able, if I tried to copy this down and log that as debug, it's not going to work because ID number and product are out of scope. They're in scope only between this curly brace and this curly brace. So if I wanted to do that, I would have to move these two outside the try, or at least declare, you know, int ID number, and then assign the ID number inside. Now that it's declared outside, I would be able to access that in here, but I'm not going to do that. So now, in order to see this, if I run this now, this will not log because it's just going to run this code, which works perfectly, and it's going to return the product. So it would log the debug line, but it would not log an error. So to cause an error, I'm going to throw a new exception, and my exception is going to be that the database it went home, and so it's not there and it blew up. So we should be able to see our dude, and we should be able to see that the database went home. We will not see this logger debug this time, because once we throw this exception here on line 36, the code execution, and I'll put a breakpoint there, the code execution will jump into the catch block and it'll throw the exception, and that's it. So these 3 lines of code will never run because I'm hard code throwing an exception, and that's why this is going to be underlined, because it says this is unreachable code now. But for our example, it's going to work good because this is going to simulate that something went wrong. So we'll run that and go back to our dog, and this time we are going to search for the ancient artifact, and it's going to throw an exception, right, which is going to get caught in the catch. It's going to log the error, dude, and it's going to throw the exception back to the UI. So we get our exception here, and we'll have to do an episode on exceptions and how to handle this more gracefully than just letting it blow up. But for now, this is, since we haven't put anything in there, this is what we get. If we look at our debug output here, you can see the system exception database went home. And then you see the actual details of this exception here. So if we look in our log, you can see that the database went home. We logged our dude up here, and then the database went home, an unhandled exception occurred, and here's all the information from that EX. So that if we look at it, and it says, hey, if you go to the API repositories, product repository, get product, right, which is in this file, product repository, the error happened on line 36. And so if we go back to our line here, you're right, it did happen on 36, so I know where to fix it. So that's the power of logging. And let's check logly for, let's see if we can do, I know you can do this, level equal error. I don't know, I can do it like that in Splunk. I don't know if I can do that in here. Looks like we can. So we got back our error message, and to make it a little easier to read, here is our database went home message. We have an unhandled exception, and it tells us the same thing it told us in the log, that it's in the products repository, line 36. The level is error, and the only thing I don't see is dude. And there it is here. It came in on another line, dude. So there you have it. So that's logging in kind of a nutshell. Hopefully that was cool. It was fun. Setting it up with Splunk is really a lot easier. It is a write to, and you just put your credentials there. You can look up how to store all of the things we hard-coded in code for Serilog in your app settings.json. Not a problem. And now you know how to use Logly too. So hopefully these logs will help you track stuff down when things go wrong. And hopefully it gives you a little insight into how production bugs are found, because we're not allowed to really debug in production. So that's this episode. Please subscribe if you found this helpful. Practice, practice, practice this stuff. The more you do it, the better you get, and the more it just kind of starts coming to you. If you do this all the time, think about learning a language or playing the guitar. You do it all the time. I do it 3, 4, 5 times a week. I write code. I'm going to keep getting better at writing code. All of a sudden, you're going to know things, and you're going to be like, how did I know that? Oh, I must have seen it somewhere. Or, oh, I know how to do that. I've done it 100 times. Let me just refer back to my old code. I always refer to my old code. I always Google things. So use those tools at your disposal, and good luck. Let me know if there's anything you want me to cover. My social media contact is in the description below. And you can leave me comments or questions in the comments for this video. That's it for this episode. I will see you next time online.